Hello, and welcome to the parent education video on teens and intense emotions. My name is Dr. Clairneige Motzoi, and I'm a psychologist at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario in the Outpatient Mental Health Services. So in this video, I'm going to talk about emotion regulation. What is it, and how does it develop? And then I'll talk about what can parents do to help their kids develop, over time, their ability to regulate emotions better and better. Emotions are a really big part of our life. We really experience our day-to-day life through emotions. Through the different experiences that we have, we might feel some emotions when we interact with someone, or when we're interacting in a close relationship, when we're going through our day at school or at work. So really having all of these emotions impacts on what's happening for us too, not just a reaction. We are learning differently depending on what emotions we have. They impact how we think and what decisions we make. So learning how to understand and regulate emotions is a really important part of growing up. It's a huge part of growing up. And lots of parents are thinking about their teenagers' development and how that's going with emotions. They might notice that their teenager has lots of ups and downs in emotions. They'll go from feeling really sad to feeling happy to feeling really angry. And there's lots of sort of ups and downs. Or they might notice that their kiddo has really intense emotions. Those emotions get really, really strong, and they might come out really, really strongly. And as teenagers are kind of approaching those adult years, they're getting closer to being an adult, parents naturally might wonder how that's going to go and might worry a little bit about that. Are they going to be able to get that job they really want? Are they going to be able to manage that anger when it comes up and manage the situation at work or in a close relationship? And it's true. Regulating emotions is really important for our well-being. So for example, we know that people who have the most success at work or in the workplace, they tend to be really good at dealing with emotions and understanding emotions inside of themselves. They tend to manage really well those interactions with other people at work, the very thing that tends to generate a lot of emotions in us. So this video is really I'll start with talking about emotions and emotion regulation. What is it, and how does emotion regulation develop? And after that, we'll talk about what are some things that parents and caregivers can do to help that development of emotion regulation over time. So what does it mean to regulate our emotions? Emotion regulation refers to our attempts to try to have certain emotions, and also, once we have emotions, maybe to change them or to change how strongly we feel them, depending on what we want. So let's say that I might have had a stressful day, and maybe I might soothe myself by taking a few deep breaths and choose to watch a comedy to lift my spirits. People do all kinds of things to manage emotions. They might choose certain situations that lead us to feel certain emotions, or once they're in the situation, they might change it. Like for example, if I'm taking a walk and I see my annoying neighbor coming out of their house, maybe I might take a different route so that I don't experience certain emotions. But then when emotions come, we might manage emotions in terms of what we pay attention to. So maybe we might distract ourselves if we're not feeling so good with the emotion that we're feeling. Or maybe we might think about the situation differently, like maybe thinking about what I can learn in a really challenging situation. And when we notice that we feel something, very often there's kind of like that process of, I notice I'm feeling something, I'm aware, I'm trying to understand what I feel, and then I might have some kind of response. I might do an action. So for example, I might be talking to somebody, they say something, and I notice that I feel hurt by what they said. So I might decide to say, hey, I felt hurt by that, and try to talk about it. That might be the action that I choose to do in that situation. So healthy and skilled emotion regulation involves a few things. First of all, we experience a range of emotions, not just one or two. We're able to experience a whole bunch of emotions. And we're aware of what we feel. We can kind of look inward and say, what is it that I'm feeling right now? We can be aware of that. And we can express emotions when it's actually helpful. It can be really helpful sometimes to be able to express emotions. That's part of emotion regulation too. Sometimes we might want to use those emotions, for example, to meet a particular goal. So I might actually want to accomplish something, and those emotions give me information. I'm capturing information. I'm understanding something about how I'm experiencing that situation through my emotions. And I might use that to decide what to do and to figure out what's a productive way of dealing with the situation. And emotion regulation might also mean that I might stop myself from doing something impulsively that might not lead to the kind of outcome that I want. So what happens in terms of emotions during those teenage years? Let's take a look at what happens in the teenage brain. The deeper part of the brain, the limbic system, is responsible for generating emotions in us, among other things. The prefrontal cortex, that front part of the brain behind our eyes, is responsible for that higher order thinking, some of those executive functioning skills, some really kind of more complex thinking. Things like thinking about my own thoughts and my own feelings, that kind of self-awareness. Making decisions and planning, thinking about consequences and what might happen next, using my judgment, thinking about what's my responsibility. If I do that, am I going to feel guilty? And, how's that going to feel? What is that going to be like? Could imagine what someone else is thinking and feeling and have empathy. Those parts of the brain are helping us with that. And it's also really helpful to control our impulses, to put the brakes on when we might kind of feel an urge to act and act. Kind of helps us put the brakes. So those are a really important part of the brain. And the brain develops from the inside outward and from the back to the front. So those frontal lobes, that prefrontal cortex, is the last one to develop. It's actually continuing to develop until our mid-20s, whereas the limbic system matures way before the prefrontal cortex. So it's kind of going off and firing all the time. So when we look at our teenagers, we can sometimes see that they are developing quite a bit in those kinds of frontal lobe ways. So we might see that they become more self-conscious. They're thinking a little bit more about themselves and their thoughts and feelings. They might talk a lot, not all teenagers, but some of them, about their interactions with people. They might be giving you a lot of detail. And they might be thinking more and more about what are other people thinking and feeling, and what are they thinking about me? At the same time, sometimes that thinking brain doesn't look like it looks like it's still developing in teenagers, and we can see that. So for example, we might see that they might jump to conclusions, or they have a hard time not acting impulsively on their urges. They might just act and they haven't slowed themselves down or put the brakes on. They might not be aware sometimes of how they come off to people. And sometimes it might be difficult for them to put themselves in the shoes of someone else, to think about what they might actually be thinking and feeling, or have empathy. Something that us adults have trouble with sometimes too. All of those things We have all gone through a process of developing those kinds of skills that help for emotion regulation. So developing the capacity to regulate emotion is a part of normal growing that us humans do, especially during the teenage years. At that time, the brain is developing a lot, and it needs experiences to be able to develop in all these kinds of different ways, including emotion regulation. So more teenagers are experiencing more and more varied types of experiences. They're having more and more experiences that they haven't had before. So, for example, they might be hanging out more in groups, or they might be getting more and more independent in how they manage their friendships. So whereas you were making the play dates before, maybe they're contacting their friends directly now. They are asked to do much more at school. So they're asked to learn really complicated things. They might be asked to perform in front of others in certain new ways. And there's more complex teasing that happens and more complex humor that's going on. There's those first heartbreaks and those situations where maybe I'm realizing that I like someone and they don't like me back, or that feeling of being excluded from a group. Every new situation comes with new and more complex emotions every day for teenagers. So they might feel really embarrassed. They might feel sympathy for something that someone's going through. They might feel pride at an accomplishment. They might feel jealous about something they're imagining in their mind or something that's happening in front of them. They might feel envy at someone else's success, or they might feel guilt because they're developing their values and they might feel guilt that they've gone against one of those values. So there's much more complex emotions as we're going through childhood and the teenage years than when they were infants and toddlers. It's getting more and more complex, and they're having feelings about having feelings. Like, for example, feeling embarrassed that I got really angry a few minutes ago, for example. So as much of a roller coaster as it is to feel all of these things, it's actually a really good thing that they're experiencing so much. If we don't experience so much as teenagers, our brain doesn't get the opportunity to really have these experiences and to experience, process, and respond to all of these emotions and all of these new situations that they're going through. The brain needs those really important experiences to go through that super rapid and major development that it's going through in the adolescent years. Now, even in mature brains, when we have really strong emotions, that limbic system, that middle part of the brain that generates emotions, sometimes takes over, and our higher order thinking part of our brain shuts down a little bit. And this makes sense. So if I'm crossing the street and a car is coming at me, what I want is to feel fear. I want my emotional brain to react really quickly and to get me out of the way. What I don't want is I don't want to think about it too much. I don't want to weigh the pros and cons of what I'm going to do. I don't want to think about what does the car look like and all the details of the car, right? Because otherwise I might get hit. I want a quick reaction. So for teenagers, on top of what's going on with their developing brain, just like everybody else, when they feel a really intense emotion, sometimes their thinking brain shuts off a little bit or shuts down or turns down a little bit. There's an extra thing that might be happening when those intense emotions are happening. So you might be thinking, okay, I get it. There's lots of things going on in the developing brain of a teenager. But why is my teen more emotional than other teenagers that I know? And there can be lots of reasons for that, but I'm going to talk to you about one of those reasons. We've all kind of noticed that some people are more emotional or more sensitive than others. We might see it in ourselves, we might see it in a family member, in our children, or maybe just other people that we know. Okay, so let's think about an example. Let's imagine a teacher who's trying to teach something to a student of hers, and she's getting really frustrated. She gets to the point where she says, "Oh my goodness, I've explained this 100 times. Why don't you get this?" And one child might react by saying, "I'm trying, but I just don't get it. Stop calling me stupid. You're being so mean," and might start crying. Whereas if the same thing happened with a different child, the teacher might say, "I've explained this 100 times. Why don't you get it?" The other child might react by saying, "Wow, Mrs. Smith, take a chill pill," right? They might have a completely different reaction. We're all different in how emotional we are and how sensitive we are. It's actually part of the normal variation in being a human being, that there's a certain chunk of the population that is hardwired to feel a little bit more sensitive. And there's a few traits that seem to be genetically passed on. So, for example, some people are more easily triggered into feeling emotions. So when things happen during the day, something happens, maybe other people might not have much of an emotional reaction, but they have an emotional reaction to that. So they're going through their day kind of feeling more emotions and having those more easily triggered during the day. Some people might feel emotions more intensely than other people. So we know that some people have a larger physiological reaction when they feel certain emotions. It's more intense. Their heart might beat a little bit harder, or they tend to hold more tension in their body. Their body is reacting more than the average population. And then you might have noticed that some people seem to change from one emotion to another pretty quickly. So they might feel, annoyed, and then the next moment they're laughing, and then a little bit later they might be really sad. So they're changing, their emotions are not lasting super long, and they're kind of changing a little bit faster. And there are other people where you might notice that the emotion comes and it stays there for a long time. They're kind of staying irritable for a long time. They're upset for longer. And depending on how you are, if you have other family members, for example, who are one way or the other, it might be confusing or frustrating for you, or you might just know that it is like that. So you might notice those quick changes in a family member, and you might think, well, how can they be over this already if you're the kind of person whose emotions last a little bit longer? Or if you're somebody where emotions don't last as long and somebody's emotion is lasting a long time and they're still upset, you might be thinking, well, why is this lasting so long? Why aren't they over it yet? So about 20% of the population is considered highly sensitive. And it's really good to just keep that in mind, that some of us are kind of hardwired to be more emotional, to feel emotions more intensely. There's lots of lovely things about being a sensitive human being. Our sensitive teens are often the ones who are fiercely loyal to their friends. They're often, when they're not experiencing an intense emotion, they are the ones who feel a lot of empathy when someone's going through a hard time. They might be wonderfully creative. They might be wonderful artists. They might create lovely art or be a wonderful actor. So lots of wonderful things about being a sensitive person. And at the same time, those of us who are sensitive by nature know that it takes a while to understand your more emotional nature. It takes a while to get it and to understand it and to learn to cope with it well. Our sensitive teens might have a little bit more of a higher mountain to climb, but once they climb that mountain, the view from that top of the mountain can be pretty great, and we can help them with that. So how do emotions happen? A situation happens, and we pay attention to something in the situation. We're paying attention. And then we might have some thoughts about what's going on, or maybe we might interpret the situation in a particular way. And at the same time, we're going to have an emotion or more than one emotion. So we might feel sad, and then we might have a number of physiological changes in our body, like feeling like low energy. And then we might respond and act in a particular way. out of that emotion and those interpretations that we made. So let's say I'm a 15-year-old and I'm scrolling through my social media and I see that my friend posted hanging out with some of our common friends. And I start thinking, they got together without me. They didn't want me there. They didn't want to include me. And so then I might be feeling rejected, and that might feel like, and left out, and that might feel like my stomach's kind of turning a little bit. And then the more I think about it and I start thinking, really, like, they shouldn't have left me out. That's not nice. I'm starting to feel anger. And then my heart beats a little bit faster as I'm feeling angry. And maybe there's more tension in my muscles and I start feeling an urge to do something. And maybe at that point, I take my phone and I text my friend, hey, why didn't you invite me to that thing you guys were at? And then there's the after effects. Now I'm in a whole new situation. I've texted my friend. Maybe she's not answering me. And this is a new situation that's going to generate more thoughts and feelings. And there's going to be after effects that are going to impact this new situation. After effects to the actions that I did. So maybe I'm feeling kind of embarrassed that I reacted so quickly, or I regret sending that text. I'm kind of living with those after effects. So some kids, and adults too, sometimes get stuck in a loop. So the loop is a situation happens and it triggers a painful feeling. And we instinctively, automatically do something to avoid or push away that feeling. It's painful, I don't want to feel it. So over time, we might get worse at facing painful feelings. We might start feeling like we're no good at coping with emotions, or we might start just avoiding feelings altogether. The problem with that is that emotion regulation has something really important that needs to happen before we can try to do anything with those emotions. And what that is actually being aware of what is it that I'm feeling, being aware of our own emotions and our own internal experience. And people are quite different actually in their ability to notice emotions when they come up, to notice changes in emotions, to notice physiological things that are going on in our body because of those emotions, or as part of those emotions, and to understand what's going on inside of them. And so studies actually show that awareness of emotions is a really crucial factor in successful emotion regulation. So we're really going to be thinking about that and thinking about how to support that for our teens. So, what can parents do to help their teens develop emotion regulation over time? Oftentimes we think about, what do I do in the moment? There's an emotion coming at me, how do I deal with that? And what I'm going to invite everyone to do is to think about more, how do I repeatedly respond to help develop those emotion regulation skills every time there's this new situation that comes up. A situation, a challenge, an emotion, all of these are opportunities, and over time it builds and builds and builds that ability to understand emotions and to manage them. So because awareness of emotion is such a crucial factor in emotion regulation, parents and caregivers can focus on helping teens become aware of what they feel and understand what they feel and why. So have you ever had that experience where you're upset, you're feeling really upset, but you can't quite figure out why and what you feel? You're trying to figure it out. You know you're upset, but you don't know more than that. And then you take a moment, maybe you've been upset all day, you take a moment and you think about it and you figure it out. Oh, I feel criticized because that person made that comment and then I felt ashamed. In that moment, when you figure it out, all of a sudden, there's this kind of relief. Oh, I get it. That's the power of emotional awareness. Understanding our own experience, when we do that, there's something magical that happens. So we've all also had the experience of being upset and talking to a friend. And as we're talking to them, they say, oh man, yeah, I get it. I would also really feel very angry in that situation. Then again, there's this relief. There's this calming sensation. They get it. One of our deepest desires is to be understood. And we connect emotionally when someone shows us that they understand how we feel, they understand our experience. When someone truly understands our experience and expresses that to us, we feel connected, even more magic happens. So to learn to regulate emotions, it helps for teenagers to have someone who can sit with them and really sit with those emotions with them. It helps to feel with them and be with them in that experience and to help them make sense of their emotions so that eventually they can do that on their own. Okay, so how do you do it? I'm going to take you through a few steps. The first step is to look and listen for emotions. The first thing we want to do is pay attention to what emotions your teen might be feeling. What do their nonverbals say? Do they look sad? Do they look angry? Listen to what they're saying with lots of curiosity. Look out for those emotion words. And they might be using emotion words, to tell us how they feel. Sometimes they don't, though. So some people use more emotion words than others. So we might need to practice putting ourselves into their shoes. So they might tell us just about what happened, and we might need to put ourselves in their shoes and think, well, what are they thinking? What are some of the thoughts that are going through their mind? How are they interpreting the situation? And what are they feeling? The second step is to use words to describe their feelings. So if they say what they feel, you can just repeat it and reflect it back to them. You can say, oh yeah, I see that you're feeling really worried about the meet tomorrow. Sometimes if they don't say it, you can ask. So you can just ask, what are you feeling? And some kids really like to talk a lot, and they're going to talk a lot and tell you all about it. And some kids don't. They don't like to talk so much. They might not know what they're feeling or know how to use words to describe it. Or they might not really want to sit and talk for very long. So you might need to ask the question, and even if they say, I don't know what I'm feeling, or I don't want to talk about it, that's okay, because just having asked the question gets them to practice just taking a moment and trying to be aware of what they're feeling. They might not be able to tolerate a whole long discussion, so you might, ask them how they're feeling, and they say, I don't know, and you might need to come back a few times and check in on that particular event and how they're doing a number of different times. And you can make educated guesses. So you can think about the situation and say, did you feel jealous? Or it looks like you're feeling disappointed. Am I reading that right? You want to show compassion and empathy for their emotions and the struggles that they might be having. And you can show that through your facial expression and through your actions, just really kind of trying to connect with them in their experience. So saying, man, you really felt embarrassed. I'm so sorry, honey. Now, here's something important. Don't stop at one emotion. If they say they're sad, ask them, you can go into it in more detail. And then after a while, ask them, is there something else that you're feeling? And maybe they might come up with something else. Yeah, I also feel angry about something in the situation. And then later ask them, is there anything else that you feel? Because usually those emotions are complex and there's more than one emotion there. So keep digging with curiosity and empathy. Step 3 is try to understand why they feel what they feel. So are they giving you some clues as to why they feel what they feel and what they're telling you? Listen carefully with curiosity. And you can ask questions to figure it out. So, what happened that made you feel embarrassed? Tell me more. You can make educated guesses. So, did you feel hurt or angry? I can imagine feeling both, or one of those two. And they can tell you. Or you could say, are you feeling sad that you can't go? or left out because they're going without you. And they might say, no, I feel more left out because they're going without me. Or they might say, neither, I feel really angry. And then you can explore that and figure out why they feel angry. And once you know why, once you figured that out, the fourth step is to say why the emotion makes sense. You have a grasp of what they feel and why. Say in your words why those feelings, those emotions make sense with empathy and compassion. So you might say, it makes sense that you feel betrayed. You trusted that she would keep your secret. That's what she said she would do. Or you might say, it makes sense that you feel sad. He's moving away and you won't see him. It's a big loss. I'm so sorry, sweetie. Or you might say, it makes sense that you're feeling angry. She was disrespectful to you. So you're just going to say in your own words why it makes sense that they feel what they feel. So the steps are, step 1, look and listen for emotions. Step 2, use words to describe emotions. Step 3, try to understand why they feel what they feel. And step 4, say why the emotion makes sense with empathy and compassion. So with every conversation where we do this, we're supporting the development of their own awareness of their own emotions and their own understanding of what they feel and why they feel it, that internal experience. We're helping them practice being aware of their emotions and understanding that internal experience, that crucial step to emotion regulation. So as we're doing that, we're connecting more and more with our teen. Our teen feels heard and understood. And with every situation, we're really building that brain, that higher order thinking, and further developing their ability to be aware of their own emotions and regulate those emotions. So you might notice that sometimes you do this kind of coaching to understand emotions and to really be there in that emotional experience just naturally. It just happens naturally, and it seems easy. And you might notice that sometimes it's a little bit more challenging to do. And there's a few things that sometimes get in the way of us being able to do that. So I'm going to invite you to think about what might be getting in the way. Why sometimes is it difficult to do that? And what is it that we feel like doing instead? Or what is it that we think we should be doing instead in certain situations? And I can talk about a few things that might be common, that are common. So the first thing is, I want to give advice. I want to solve the problem. And so you might notice that you kind of jump to giving advice and trying to tell them what they should do to solve the problem. We have lots of tools in our toolbox as parents. Giving advice is helpful sometimes. So sometimes teens don't want advice. They want to figure it out on their own. And sometimes they do want advice. They come to us and they say, Dad, I don't know what to do. Can you help me figure it out? Problem solving is a different skill than emotion regulation. And so if your teen struggles with emotion regulation, then coach them to understand what they feel and why, and be there with them in that emotional experience. You really want to slow that down. That's what's going to help them develop the capacity to slow it down, to better understand what they're experiencing, to not act on those impulses, to figure out what is it that I need, what is this emotion telling me. That's really going to be very helpful for that. Maybe your teen struggles with emotion regulation and problem solving. And so if you want to help them with both, there's a few things that are helpful. The first thing is start with emotion regulation. So really take a lot of time to focus on the emotions and their experience and why they feel what they feel for a long time. If you skip that opportunity, you're skipping that kind of emotion regulation development opportunity. So do that for a long time. And then afterwards, once you've done that, once they feel connected, once that's kind of calmed down, then you can start problem solving. Now, if you want them to develop the ability to problem solve, don't give them all the answers. You might want to ask them, what do you want in the situation? What's important to you? What do you think you should do? And start the conversation that way. Sometimes we really feel like, no, we really need to teach a lesson. We really need to give advice. We need to tell them something important. So if you decide to do that, if that's the kind of situation where you say, I really need to teach them this lesson, then make sure that you focus on connecting emotionally first and then correcting and doing the teaching afterwards. So another challenge that comes up is, I want them to stop feeling the pain. Sometimes we notice that we just want to take their pain away. And so we do whatever we can to do that. We cheer them up. We tell them that person that said horrible things was completely wrong. We tell them they're being too hard on themselves. We cheerlead them and we encourage them. And it's lovely to have a parent who cheers you up and tries to encourage you. And those are wonderful tools that we can use to support our child and to support our relationship with them. Now, if the goal is to make them feel better in the moment and to help them feel supported, you can use this approach. Now, if your goal is to help them develop that ability to regulate emotions, including the really painful ones, then cheerleading or cheering them up or encouraging them without really paying attention and staying with that painful feeling might push away the feeling. It doesn't give them the chance to really be aware of that feeling, be able to understand it, tolerate it, know that they can stand it, and be able to understand why they feel what they feel. So this is a hard one. You might need to look out for that urge to save them from feeling pain and resist the urge. Another challenge that comes up is, I don't understand why they feel what they feel. It doesn't make sense to me. So sometimes teens come with really strong emotions that might seem out of proportion. And in that situation, it can be hard to show empathy. We don't get it. So here's a few things that can help. The first thing is, remember that the intensity of emotion is not something that we choose. Partly it's that sensitivity that is genetically passed on. And just in general, we don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, at 2:05, I'd really like to feel intense rage. We don't do that. Feelings come and they just take us by surprise. Now, if you don't understand why they feel so strongly, keep in mind that they might not understand either. It might be that they're kind of confused. They know they feel a lot of distress, but they might not know exactly why or might not understand it completely. So that's helpful to keep in mind as you're approaching it with them. The third thing is that if you can't see the logic of why they feel what they feel, you can put the emphasis on wanting to understand. So you can say, I want to understand. I think I might be missing something important, but I really want to understand what's making you feel this way. Can you tell me more about it? And that way you kind of open it up without necessarily having all the answers, but you can explore it together. And the last thing is that sometimes what's on the surface, or what we're aware of, is not the whole story. So emotions are like an iceberg. What's above the water, what you can see or what you're aware of, is just the tip of the iceberg. Someone could be expressing a feeling, but there might be so many other feelings and thoughts and maybe painful memories that are getting triggered, or difficult kind of experiences that they might be remembering. All kinds of things might be underneath that feeling. And anger is a really good example of that. So very often you'll see anger, you'll see yelling coming at you, and really below the water there might be a lot. There might be hurt, feeling rejected, feeling embarrassed or ashamed, feeling worried, remembering something really painful from the past, or something that happened in the present situation kind of pushed on a wound. There might be thoughts like, nobody's ever going to love me. There might be a lot behind it that we might not necessarily see. So be curious and keep digging, and assume that there's good reasons why those emotions might be present, either in the present situation or something from the past, but just approach it with curiosity. Okay, so a last challenge that might come up is noticing that you feel uncomfortable with certain emotions. So you might notice that as emotions are coming, you might feel kind of uncomfortable to talk about emotions. It might be something where you have a hard time with emotions, staying with emotions in general, or you might notice that there's an emotion in particular that creates a little bit more discomfort for you. So for example, some parents have a hard time when their child feels really sad. That really brings up a lot for them. Other parents might have a really hard time when their child feels angry. So we can reflect on our own emotional learning and ask ourselves some questions. Are there any emotions that are harder for you to stay with for yourself? Are there some emotions that are harder for you to hear from your child? Is it when they feel sad? When they're expressing anger? When they feel ashamed? When they feel jealous? If they feel really afraid? What kind of experience is that for you when these different emotions come up? What does it mean if your child is really sad or really angry about something? What does that mean for you? So take some time to reflect on that. Maybe talk about it with someone you trust, if you would find that helpful. And just be mindful of what might be coming up for you. Okay, so you made it to the end of the video. I hope it was helpful. Some of the ideas in this video are taken from dialectical behavior therapy, from emotion coaching, and from emotion-focused family therapy. If you're looking to support your teen to learn more emotion regulation skills, and they themselves agree that they're having trouble with regulating emotions, there might be lots of ups and downs in emotions, and they're interested in learning more about those kinds of skills, it might be helpful to find a therapist who provides dialectical behavior therapy, or finding a dialectical behavior therapy group in your community. If you're looking for more support for you as a parent in supporting your teen, you can look for therapists who provide emotion-focused family therapy and who would go more into details about those steps of emotion coaching that we talked about. And what might also be helpful is if you're looking for kind of more of a group format or meeting other parents, there's a group for parents of teens that covers similar concepts and goes into more detail. It's really meant to help parents connect with their teens, and it's called the Connect Group for parents of teenagers. It's available in a number of different locations, and you can look at whether it's available in your city. And the last thing is, if you want to learn more about this topic of emotion regulation on your own, you can take a look at the resources that we've listed below. So there's websites, there's some videos and books on emotions and on how parents can support their kids' development of emotion regulation. So thank you very much, and wishing you all the best with your exploration of this topic.